Hello everyone! Today we're going to talk about the 1972 miniseries adaptation of Jane Austen's novel Emma, the classic story of a clever young woman who tries and fails to play matchmaker with her friends. This adaptation is 4.5 hours long, but it's divided into 6 manageable episodes. You can find them on YouTube. I've put a link in the description. I've talked about a couple other versions on here. I've actually talked about 3, but when I talked about the 2009 one, it was a long time ago. It wasn't really an official review. I'll talk about it again at some point in the future. And I've talked about the book. Links to those videos are in the description as well. So I am slowly making my way through Emma adaptations, as I've done with Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion. I will talk about Sense and Sensibility and Mansfield Park someday, but I've only read those once, and I need to reread them before I can discuss them. As is the case with any of these older British TV adaptations, the visual appearance and the acting style and the long takes may take some getting used to. Some people just don't like it, and they never get used to it. I've been watching Emma adaptations for a long time. I've seen all the other ones at least twice, and yet until this year, I never sought this one out. It just didn't appeal to me. Now I've seen it, and I'm going to sound like a massive contrarian, because this is probably everyone's least favorite adaptation, if they even know it exists, but I must say, I liked it. I really liked it. If you're a stickler for faithfulness to the source material, it's very satisfying. I love the book, and I was happy to see many scenes that are often left out or trimmed down. But something that I think makes Emma adaptations especially fun to talk about is that they all tell the story differently, and this one's got its own interesting changes and additions. Nothing wild, but things that Jane Austen didn't exactly write. I admit my first impression was a little rough, mainly because many of the actors appear to be much older than their characters. I went through the whole thing thinking Emma in particular was too old. I was therefore shocked to find out afterward that actress Doreen Godwin is only 22 here. That's just 1 year older than the character. And in fact, she's the youngest actress to play the role among the 5 major adaptations. She just looks older and more mature. But I like her performance. Her Emma is irksome at times, but what Emma isn't? And I found she did a very good job demonstrating the character's increasing self-awareness and humility over the course of the series. I found her likable, sympathetic, not too mean or cruel. I also appreciate how expressive she is. I find some of her reactions humorous, and she does a good job with brief, meaningful pauses and small changes in her face. Mr. Knightley, Austen's graceful, astute, sagacious country gentleman, is played by John Carson, and he was a little too old by a few years. I could never really buy that he was 37, but at least with Emma looking older and having the appropriate composure and responsibility of a mature young woman, I guess the extra years in the gap get shaved off. Some of you may remember this, those of you who watch my costume drama reviews and my creature feature reviews. I was not planning to watch this. I didn't have this on my to-do list for 2024 until a few months ago when I saw a low-budget horror movie from 1965 titled The Night Caller, or Blood Beast from Outer Space. There was a character in that movie I took a liking to, a no-nonsense major with a noteworthy voice who had trouble grasping the scientific jargon but tried his best to do his job. It's not a character I've never seen before, but I liked the way the actor played him. So afterward I looked him up, and I learned that he was John Carson, and discovered that among other things, many other things, he has a very lengthy filmography, Carson wound up playing my favorite Austen hero in the one direct adaptation of Emma I had never seen. So he's the reason I watched this. And despite the age thing, which, come to think of it, he was actually the perfect age in The Night Caller, but Despite the fact that he's a little too old, I very much enjoyed his interpretation of Mr. Knightley. He's not a dreamboat, he's not going to win the Mr. Knightley beauty contest or popularity contest, and probably if I'd watched this when I was younger, I'd have been like, ew, no. Maybe, I don't know, I'm unpredictable that way. But here in 2024, I'd already liked the actor in something else, and I'm predisposed to like the character, so he'd have to be really bad or do something terribly offensive for me to dislike him. Far from that, I thought he was spot on. His Mr. Knightley has an easy sense of humor, he's observant and intuitive, he's not stylish, but he's correct, he's a peacemaker, and he's a fount of wisdom, whether or not Emma heeds his warnings. I really enjoy their scenes together, the many lengthy discussions they have, the dynamic between them. There are lots of exchanged glances, often amused glances, and I like that kind of thing. And they're not just squabbling all the time. It's not a constant battle of the sexes. They're good friends and have been for years. Sometimes he's critical and she's sassy, but though there are a couple topics on which they differ, they respect each other's opinion. They like talking things over together, and above all, they enjoy each other's company. Theirs is a calm, easy companionship that I find extremely desirable. Now here's a speedy rundown of some of the other characters. Mr. Woodhouse makes me think of a spider for some reason, but he also reminds me of an undertaker in both appearance and outlook. Harriet Smith is bubbly and breathless and indecisive. Half of her lines are, "Yes, Miss Woodhouse. No, Miss Woodhouse. Oh, Miss Woodhouse." This Mr. Elton isn't quite so unctuous and despicable as some others, but he's still... Miss Bates is a more pathetic character, a bit less ridiculous, but still way too chatty. People are often politely telling her to be quiet and listen, or having to talk over her. I like this Jane Fairfax. She looks right, the personality is right. The only thing that was off was her piano playing. Considering how musically talented she's supposed to be, the performances seemed kind of mediocre. But I enjoy it when she stands up for herself, when her aunt or Mrs. Elton pushes her too far. I only wish she could be that firm with Frank Churchill, the jerk. Speaking of, Frank Churchill. He's aggravating. I wanted to hit him most of the time. But I've come to dislike his character intensely in the last couple years, so even when he wasn't being a deceitful little twerp, he made me mad. Mrs. Elton? She's a character. She was probably the quirkiest person, and I applaud the actress for playing up her loud, grating voice. And surprisingly, we see more of Mrs. Goddard in this version. There's a scene of her introducing Emma and Harriet, plus a few scenes of her and Harriet at the school, which are fun. And here are my thoughts on some individual scenes. I'll try not to go into too much detail here, but I will be touching on some spoilers, I can't help it, so consider yourself warned. In this version, we actually see Emma dictate the letter in which Harriet refuses Robert Martin's proposal. She doesn't want to, and I believe her, but Harriet's such a goose that she has to have Emma tell her word for word what to write. Emma rattles off what she should say, and then Harriet just stares up at her vacantly. So then Emma's like, "Dear Mr. Martin," or whatever she says. So then, when Mr. Knightley says, "You saw her answer? You wrote her answer, didn't you?" We know that for all intents and purposes, she did. And she's like, Now, it's implied in all the other versions that she probably told her what to say. But here, it's so clear that it's like, I'm pleased that they give some extra time to the Knightleys' Christmas visit. I'm always interested in the contrast between Emma and her sister Isabella and George and John Knightley. Since reading the book this last time, I have a totally different view of John. I used to like his sarcastic comments, I thought they were funny, but now I perceive how rude and irritable he is, and it's not, I don't like it, especially when he's nasty to his father-in-law. It's not good that his brother and sister-in-law have to be on the alert and run interference. It just makes everyone uncomfortable, and it's like, just, you're a grown man, keep your snarky comments to yourself. But hey, Mr. Knightley looks even better by comparison. Just before that scene, I like the bit where Mr. Knightley arrives at Hartfield for the family party. It's the first time he's been back at the house since he argued with Emma, and the servant quietly informs him that everyone else is gathered together, but Miss Woodhouse is with the baby in the nursery. So he goes up there to make up with her, and it's a nice, surprisingly intimate scene. Although I had to laugh at the way the baby didn't really want to cooperate. It kept stretching its legs and then throwing itself back in that terrifying way that babies do, where they try to, like, launch themselves out of your arms. I noticed a couple times when the way it's played, it's suggested that Emma could be on the precipice of realizing she wants Mr. Knightley for herself if she would just follow the train of thought, be a little more honest. When she tells Mrs. Weston that it would be unfair if he married Jane Fairfax, and Mrs. Weston says, "Unfair to whom?" And Emma's like, to Henry! I didn't picture her stumbling like that in the book. And when she's talking to Mr. Knightley himself about the crazy idea of his marrying someone, you can tell it's uncomfortable for her. She'd lose her friend. They wouldn't be able to talk the way they have been. She knows that. And in that scene, I laughed at his reaction when she says he might be surprised someday by his own regard for Jane. He gives her a cold, raised eyebrow and shuts that down, and then he smoothly uncovers the scissors she was apparently searching all over for. Not that she said anything, but he knew because Mr. Knightley knows everything. I love the times when it cuts from Mrs. Elton being presumptuous and annoying to Emma telling Mr. Knightley about it afterward. He just listens and laughs while she goes on this explosive rant. For people who get excited about the dance at the ball, I'm afraid this version is pretty disappointing. It happens, but it's not nearly the big deal it is in later adaptations. Every version since the 90s has turned this into a significant moment, giving it far more romantic emphasis than Austen did. The way it plays out here is much closer to the book. We only see them dancing together for about 10 seconds, and it's way over there. Mrs. Elton's fascination with Mr. Knightley. I was warned about this ahead of time, but it was still odd. Every Mrs. Elton makes a big deal out of what a gentleman he is, so shocking. But this one, she seems kind of like, "Oh, shucks, my husband's not here." She suddenly drops in on him at Donwell Abbey, waltzing in unannounced, which does not seem appropriate. She's a married woman, he's a bachelor, it's his house, what? I like that he immediately puts his coat on. And then at Box Hill, she's like, "Ooh, there's a bug crawling on me. Ooh, I can't get it off. Well, in my my caro sposo's absence, I'll permit you to remove it for me." Ooh. I also love the bit during the excursion when he and Emma are watching Mrs. Elton deliver orders to the guests, loudly, and Emma starts fuming. "They're your strawberries!" And he's just like, whatever. I would so be Emma in that situation. "They're your strawberries!" Overall, with a couple exceptions, and I would say Mrs. Elton is one of them, I don't find the supporting characters as funny in this version. They're not overdrawn and played for laughs, as they are in some other adaptations, therefore the film feels less like a comedy. Miss Bates, for example, never seems as ridiculous, and when Emma goes to apologize to her, I found it almost heartbreaking to watch her self-conscious fluttering. She was hurt on Box Hill, clearly, but she doesn't want to make Miss Woodhouse feel bad by admitting it, for in her eyes, Miss Woodhouse can do no wrong. Plus, she's dealing with the imminent departure of her beloved niece. She's a vulnerable, pitiable older woman, and I found myself laughing at her much less. I feel similar sadness for Mr. Woodhouse, Emma's father. He's the fussy, needy hypochondriac, yes, and that makes him a figure of fun, but because he has more dialogue here, you understand more of his psyche. He's a frightened old man. To him, marriage is a tragic event best avoided. Childbirth is a terrifying and unnecessary risk. He wants everyone to be well, and he wants everything to stay the same. Emma's been running his house and looking after him for years. She does everything the way he likes it, and the idea of any change in the status quo is horrifying. Losing poor Miss Taylor was bad enough. The idea of anything happening to Emma that would take her away, be it sickness or marriage, is just unbearable. This adaptation isn't overtly romantic either. Like I said, the dance is a little thing, and the proposal isn't a lush, picturesque, Hollywood-style scene. There's no music, the conversation is confusing at one point. Oh, I was talking about someone else. Oh, I thought that no, it's... And for the first time, they're awkward together. They don't know what to say. They're tripping over themselves. Mr. Knightley, normally well-spoken, is flustered and tongue-tied, because he wasn't planning to propose today, and it's a mess. And as far as any lovey-dovey stuff goes, it's not there. There's a discreet cutaway in the middle of the proposal scene, and then we come back. You can infer a kiss there if you want to, but it's not shown, and Austen didn't describe it either. She didn't write romance novels. I like the resolution of the Jane and Emma relationship. In general, I like how that part of the story is done. Emma isn't quite such a pill about Jane, and even when she is, because we get to see how frustrating it was for her to try to have a conversation with her, it was like talking to a wall, we understand her feelings. But Emma turns around on her sooner, and the short exchange at Donwell is good. And I was tickled by the little scene they threw in where he says, well, if we're gonna get married, could you try to call me George? It is my name. And she's like, ugh! I always had trouble with that. How on earth is she gonna switch from calling him Mr. Knightley, which she's done her whole life, to calling him George? It'll be like talking to a different person. I feel this adaptation of Emma is much better than people give it credit for. It doesn't have recognizable names and faces, it's not full of beautiful people, but I think it does very well with actors who are true to the characters, and it takes its time telling the whole story. I will say, Episode 4, for some reason, felt a little slow. It was a little heavy on the talking. I got a bit sleepy, but it picks up again. Also, for as faithful as it is, there are some lines that are noticeably absent, and that was a little shocking. Will this version appeal to everyone? No. My mom never really got into it. But I enjoyed it a lot, and while it's not my new number 1 or number 2 Emma, I will definitely watch it again someday. Editing Weaselberry here, just popping in at the end to say, I already have watched it again in the course of making this video, and I like it even better. The casting, the characterizations, the costumes, the bonnets, the humor, the humanity. Overall, despite the lines I miss, I'm very happy with this adaptation. Those are my thoughts on the 1972 adaptation of Emma. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts on this version if you've seen it in the comments below, and I'll be back next week. Thanks for watching.